What's up, Summoners? I'm Kangas, and we both know what you're here for. This is our patch rundown covering all the changes for patch 11.5, and with it, we'll be providing our usual tier lists for all 5 roles. So make sure to hit that sub button, and let's get right into it. So to kick off the video, happy to announce that we do have new skins this patch. Bima, Bizahar, and Yubi are now available in the skin shop. These skins are more on the cute and silly side, so give them a look if that's your style. Kog'Maw has needed a skin for a while now, so for you 3 Kog'Maw mains that still exist out there, congratulations, Riot has acknowledged your existence and given you some love this patch. Next up, let's run through the balance changes. The first changes are a couple item buffs. Black Cleaver's gotten some nice changes this patch, as the cost was reduced from 3,300 to 3,100, the health increased from 300 to 400, and the Butcher passive was removed. In its place, you now gain movement speed when you deal physical damage to an enemy. Each stack of Carve on the enemy you hit will grant 5 bonus movement speed for 20 seconds. Basically, we're running it back with the old Black Cleaver. As a result, fighters and Juggernauts are now going to be much more mobile at the cost of some damage. However, the lowered price point also makes the item much more easily accessible. It's looking like a solid purchase on champions like Darius and Garen, and I could even see Pantheon potentially going for it. Next is a buff for Maw of Malmortius. The cost has been lowered from 3,100 down to 2,800. Now that it's cheaper, it'll be much easier to tech into your builds when you want to counter higher amounts of burst damage. It's a good buff, and we always want situational items to be cheaper so that they don't go out of the way of our other core purchases. Serpent's Fang has also been buffed, as the Shield Reaver passive has received changes this patch. Dealing damage to an enemy now applies a debuff that reduces incoming shields by 50% or 25% based on whether you're melee or ranged. You don't really have to think about timing anymore, you just hit an enemy and you open up a big debuff window on your opponent. Against champions who have great ratios on their shields, Serpent's Fang will act as an incredible counter in the same way that Grievous Wounds counters healing. Now that we're done with the buffs, let's take a look at our question of the day. What champion always pops off on the enemy team but somehow manages to feed when they're on yours? For me, it's gotta be Vayne. I'm a support main, and for some reason, every time I land against Vayne, she just ends up getting fed. Don't ask me why, it's definitely not my fault, but then when I have a Vayne on my team, she just sucks. Let me know yours in the comments down below though. Now let's move on to item adjustments. Up first is Stridebreaker. The power has been shifted around with the dash distance increased from 200 to 300, however, the slow was reduced from 60 to 40% and the damage lowered from 100 to 75% of your total AD. This change means that the user will be more mobile, but it'll be less crippling for the enemy hit by it. The item now enables its user with a bigger dash, but you'll be less successful when trying to slow down an enemy and dogpiling on them as a team. I can't really tell if this will be a buff to the set builds going around with this right now, because yeah, you can reposition further to get a better ult, but you do a little less damage. Let me know your thoughts. Next up is Muramana, which has also gotten a pretty big change. Instead of both abilities and attacks dealing 2.5% of your max mana as damage, they now deal separate amounts of damage. Attacks deal 1.5% max mana, while abilities deal 3.5% for melee and 2.7% for ranged of your max mana, as well as 6% of your total AD. This buff is huge for AD spellcasters, and we expect champions like Jace, Corki, and Ezreal to excel on this patch. Now let's run through champion changes, starting with the top lane. So first up, Jax has been buffed this patch. Other fighters are seeing high levels of play and success, with high elo players loving Aurelia and Fiora dominating some solo queues after her buffs as well. This patch, Jax's AD per level has been increased from 3.38 to 4.25 to help him keep up with the competition. Not only does this increase Jax's attack damage, it also increases the amount of damage he'll deal with Trinity Force's Spellblade effect. With his scaling buffed up, we've moved Jax into the A tier as a result. After some observations, our analysts have also moved Viego down into the B tier as well. The previous nerfs to his sustain as a laner did some damage, and he feels a bit weaker in the top lane as a result. One more thing that we want to mention is that with these changes to Serpent's Fang, Riven will definitely be a bit weaker this patch. Our analysts want to hold off on moving her anywhere at the moment just to see how the change affects her, but we expect her to move around sometime in the future. By the way, if you guys are trying to get better at the game yourself, make sure to check out ProGuides.com. If you use the code RANKUP2021, you can get 20% off of a subscription, and you don't want to miss out on it. So our OP picks in the top lane are Garen, Darius, and Gnar, followed by Malphite, Aatrox, Wukong, Camille, Maokai, Poppy, Cho'Gath, Riven, Mordekaiser, and Fiora in the S tier. Next up, let's run through the jungle. Extremely strong lately. His health per level has been reduced from 99 to 92, and his Phoenix stage Udyr is slightly squishier than before, clears the jungle a little slower, and overall doesn't scale as well. Although these aren't small nerfs necessarily, our analysts still think that Udyr will remain OP, just not as OP as before. He's staying put on the tier list for now, but he could definitely move around next time. Rammus was also nerfed this patch. His health per level has been lowered from 95 to 80, and while being a bit squishier than before, he remains essentially unchanged. The loss of health does hurt Rammus more than others, but he's still a strong pick in solo queue just because of how straightforward his crowd control is, and also because of his damage output. This feels like a potential nerf leading up to the changes to his ultimate that we'll see in the future, but even with them, he'll remain in the S tier for now. Next up, we got a nerf for competitive play. Gragas' Q mana cost has been increased from 60 to 80 to just a flat 80. Thankfully, this change won't affect jungle Gragas too much, but it will definitely make him a weaker laner. The increased mana cost will either force players to use the ability more sparingly, or instead purchase some more mana. But Gragas can still definitely take Doran's Ring to start anyway, so we'll leave him in the B tier for this patch. Now for buffs, we got Trundle coming up first. His Q's cooldown was reduced from 4 seconds to 3.5 seconds. He's been doing terribly in high elo and just a little below average in low elo. However, this buff is something that all players can take advantage of. Trundle will clear the jungle much faster and also be stronger in fights, so we moved him up to the B tier after this change. Next up is Master Yi. His E's on hit damage has been increased from 18 to 50 to 20 to 60. The biggest difference this will make is what builds are optimal on Yi. With the maxed out E, he'll now deal 10 more damage on hit, and as a result, attack speed is looking a lot more appealing on him. Master Yi has been underperforming, so we'll leave him in the B tier though, even with this buff. Sejuani also got a nice little buff this patch. The second hit damage on her W has gone up from 5.25% to 6% of max HP. Although not game-changing, Sejuani's clear speed has been increased by this buff, and she'll obviously be a bigger threat in fights as a result. Sejuani will be moved into the A tier after this change. She provides massive utility to teams, and even a small increase in damage should help her provide more meaningful impact early on so that she can scale to a monster in the late game. And one final change we made to the list is that we moved Shyvana down to the B tier. While our analysts were hopeful, it turns out that the previous buffs Shyvana received have made her a good pick only in very low elo. Players in middle tier and higher brackets aren't able to convert these buffs into anything meaningful. This is likely because Shyvana takes some time to get rolling, and while she's farming up, enemy junglers are just way more impactful to their lanes, ganking and providing pressure. As a result, our OP picks this patch are Hecarim, Udyr, and Viego, followed by Kha'Zix, Graves, Evelynn, Rammus, Echo, Kayn, Nunu, Ivern, Fiddlesticks, Karthus, Elise, and Skarner in the S tier. Next up, we'll run through the mid lane. Similar to Gragas, Azir has gotten that competitive high tier treatment. Azir has been a little too strong in competitive play, so it's time for some nerfs. His W soldier attack damage has been lowered from 60 to 160 down to 50 to 150. Not good news for most solo queue players since Azir was already underperforming there. We'll leave Azir in the C tier for now. This champion is just so hard to balance for solo queue without breaking him in competitive play, so good luck to Riot for trying to find that balance. Next up, Qiyana has received some pretty big buffs. Her W's on hit damage was increased from 8 to 40 to 8 to 64, W movement speed up from 5 to 10 to 5 to 13%, and on top of that, she's also getting a 15% increase to her W's AP ratio. And her R damage increased from 100 to 240 to 100 to 300. She's gotten a lot of buffs this patch. She's stronger in long fights, is more mobile than before, and her late game burst damage has also been buffed significantly. 60 more damage on her ultimate is a pretty big change. Qiyana was already a powerful pick in high elo, but was tailing behind in lower to mid elos. With this change, we expect more of the player base to take advantage of her strength, and also that high elo players might even find her OP. Another change we've made is moving Corki into the A tier. With the changes to Muramana, Corki's damage output is going to go up significantly. Corki is unique because he can build AD and still deal a ton of magic damage. With a short cooldown on his ultimate, Corki will definitely benefit from the change to the item. It'll also mix up his damage spread a little bit, making it harder to effectively itemize against him. We've also moved Pyke down into the C tier, but we'll cover that more in our support section. If you missed our last mid-patch update, one of the biggest changes is that we moved Kassadin into the OP tier. Last patch featured a buff to Everfrost, and Kassadin immediately came out stronger as a result. In high elo, he's drawing bans left and right. It's just much easier to scale up than before. With a bigger power spike from Everfrost, Kassadin is able to pop off much harder after completing his mythic item. If you can't properly punish him, there's no doubt that he'll eventually become that late game monster that you hate to see on the enemy team. Although lower elo players often get punished with this pick, starting from around Platinum and higher, Kassadin has some nutty statistics, having win rates anywhere from 52 to 54% based on where you're looking. Veigar did recently get some buffs to not only help out his early game, but also make his late game more menacing. As a result, we've seen his win rate and play rate climb significantly around Silver and Bronze specifically. So to conclude the mid lane, we've got Yone, Anivia, and Kassadin in the OP tier, followed by Pantheon, Zed, Victor, Annie, Katarina, Galio, Malphite, Fizz, Echo, Seraphine, Kiana, Viego, Diana, Talon, and Yasuo in the S tier. Next, let's run through the bot lane. To start off the bot lane, we got some good news, everybody. That is nerfs to Seraphine. First, her passive note from allies now deal 25% damage, but the decay after the first note has been removed. Next, her ultimate's cooldown has been increased from 160 to 120 seconds to 180 to 120 seconds. Finally, her passive note damage scaling was changed from 4 to 16 with a smooth progression to 4, 8, 14, and 24 at levels 1, 6, 11, and 16. Overall, this set of changes makes farming XP paramount on Seraphine. The change from a smooth progression to having benchmarks means that until you hit levels 6, 11, and 16 respectively, you've lost a lot of your power. Solo lane Seraphine will naturally hit these spikes faster and suffer less from the change, but bottom lane Seraphine is another situation altogether. The other thing too is that notes from allies will deal significantly less damage than before, leaving mid lane Seraphine almost untouched, while nerfing bottom lane and support Seraphine pretty hard. We've moved Seraphine down to the A tier as a result of this change. Speaking of supports in the bot lane position, Senna was also nerfed. Specifically, her synergy with Guinsoo's was gutted. Senna's passive will no longer grant excess crit over 100%, but instead convert it to lifesteal with the same ratio as before. Guinsoo's crit chance conversion is now capped at 100%, and the on-hit damage is now affected by champion crit modifiers. Senna is one of those champions, as her crits deal less damage than most others. As a result of these changes, we've moved her down to the A tier. With 2 nerfs out of the way, we actually got a buff here for Kog'Maw, just in time for the new skin. His W's damage was increased from 3 to 6% to 3 to 7% of his target's maximum health. Although it's a good buff, it's kinda hard to justify picking Kog'Maw when there's just safer picks that can still deal plenty of damage. The most notable alternative being Jinx, who has an incredible amount of range after those recent buffs. Other marksmen can provide utility to their team, and I think at the moment, there's really no shortage of damage, making it even harder to justify picking Kog'Maw right now. But hey, he got a skin, and if you like playing him, it's worth a shot. But he'll remain in the B tier this patch. Samira was recently over-nerfed last patch, so she's getting a bit of love this time around. Her AD per level has been increased from 2.3 to a flat 3, while her Q's damage ratio has gone up from 80 to 110% to 80 to 120%. This is a nice buff that should help Samira gain back some of her strength. I mean, she did end last patch with a 46% win rate though, so we're keeping her in the C tier for now. Finally, Twitch has gotten an adjustment himself, taking some power away from his AP builds, but making his AD builds slightly stronger in return. His passive's AP ratio was decreased from 3% to 2.5%, while his ultimate's bonus AD was increased from 25 to 55 to 30 to 60. The duration on it was also increased by 1 second. Although this change doesn't remove AP Twitch from the game, it does cut down his damage output significantly. There is still a little bit of hope because the buffs still help out AP Twitch, even if it's only slightly. Twitch remains an A tier pick after this change. The final change that we've made to the list is that we moved Caitlyn into the S tier. She's made her comeback after some really nice buffs to her scaling. While she's not the same OP tier menace as before, Caitlyn is once again a consistent pick that players can rely on. Since she doesn't fall off nearly as hard as before, you can pick Caitlyn for her safety and go for small leads and worry a bit less about not having enough damage later into the game. We also do want to mention that Ezreal is currently on our watch list. The changes to Muramana are huge, as ability damage now includes an AD ratio. Ezreal utilizes a good mix of both ability damage and basic attack damage, however, so our analysts want to hold off on making any shifts to his placement, but we'll be watching. Our OP pick in the bot lane is Kai'Sa, followed up by Ezreal, Ashe, Vayne, Miss Fortune, Jinx, Jhin, and Caitlyn in the S tier. Now let's conclude with supports. Music to my ears, a nerf to Shaco support is first. Our analysts were at first underrating Shaco because of his low play rate. However, it became quite apparent in the last few patches that in all elos, but especially in lower elos, Shaco support has been extremely difficult to deal with. This patch, his W's AoE damage has been reduced from 15 to 35 to 10 to 30, while the single target damage has been decreased from 35 to 95 to 25 to 85. But to make sure that this is only hitting support and not jungle, his W will deal 10 to 50 bonus damage to jungle monsters. Although jungle Shaco remains practically untouched, this change is definitely going to do damage to the bot lane Shaco players, and we'll leave him in the B tier as we think this should accurately reflect his placement after this nerf. Next up, Rell has also been nerfed, with her base armor going down from 35 to 32, while her W's cooldown being increased from 11 to 13 seconds. These nerfs do hit Rell, but we don't think that they'll be enough to really shake up her S tier placement. The 3 armor nerf is rather negligible, but the nerf to her W's cooldown is pretty significant. Players commit much more when casting the ability as opposed to before, but we still believe that she'll do well in spite of this change. This one's kind of exciting. Pyke has received some big changes this patch. While they do help him out significantly as a support, mid lane Pyke is going
gonna suffer quite a bit. Kinda feels like this was the purpose of these changes. His passive Grey Health storage has been changed from 25 to 50% based on champion level, to 10% plus 25% lethality, increased to 35% plus 50% lethality when 2 or more enemies are nearby. This is an interesting change that'll not only buff up support Pyke, but also significantly hurt mid lane Pyke. Early on, storing only 10% Grey Health is a massive hindrance, although Pyke will undoubtedly be stronger in the mid to late game, regardless of where you play him. This early game nerf might be too much for solo lane Pykes to survive because they won't really make it there. In the bottom lane, you'll usually be playing against 2 opponents, meaning that you'll have that base of 35%, a bit higher than previous patches. It is entirely possible though that this buff completely flops. For example, players might just learn to back away while Pyke is trying to heal. So we'll leave Pyke in the A tier after this change. Karma has also been buffed this patch, with her Q's cooldown being reduced from 9 to 7 seconds to 8 to 6 seconds. Riot's gone ahead and partially reverted the big nerf from last season that completely gutted her. With a shorter cooldown on Q, Karma will be a much stronger lane bully, and this change also buffs up solo lane Karma significantly. Yikes. As a result of this buff, we have moved Karma up into the B tier. Another change that we made is moving Seraphine into the A tier. The nerfs she received hurt her in duo lanes significantly, and as a result, we expect her to be much weaker this patch. Again, Senna also received a nerf, so she's been dropped down to the B tier too. Our OP picks for support are now Leona and Thresh, followed by Lulu, Bard, Morgana, Nami, Janna, Alistar, Brand, Nautilus, and Rell in the S tier.
Well, I was borderline considering maining Pyke this season anyway, and with these buffs, I don't really have a reason not to, other than just being straight trash on assassins. So if you want to save me some LP, please talk me out of it in the comments down below, and while you're there, don't forget to answer our question of the day, leave a like on the video, sub to the channel, all that jazz, but we all know most importantly. Best of luck on the Rift. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.